Ma'am, I'm sorry, you are not on the list. The word struck harder than a court-martial. The young officer didn't look older than 22. His jaw was tight with authority, but his eyes betrayed the flicker of discomfort that came with this kind of confrontation. He held up the tablet like it was a shield between us, his gloved hand pointing at the screen. I didn't need to look. I knew. Still, I glanced out of habit, not hope. 3 names listed beneath the guest slot for Lieutenant Commander Brandon Walsh, Thomas Walsh, Elaine Walsh, and Mrs. Caroline Walsh. My father, my mother, my brother's wife. My name. Claire Walsh was not there. Not even as a footnote. A breeze cut across the pavement and tugged at the edges of my beige trench coat. I adjusted the belt loosely wrapped around my waist, the only thing separating the world from the truth, pressed against my skin. The sharp-lined fabric of my service dress whites, the cold weight of rank hidden on my shoulders. I understand, I said evenly. He shifted uncomfortably, caught off guard by my calm. I offered him a small nod to release him from his own unease. It's not your fault. He nodded once, grateful for the exit, and turned back toward the entrance booth. I stayed where I was, cemented into the moment. The main gate of the U.S. Naval Academy in Annapolis had never felt so large. 15 years ago, I had stood just beyond these same iron bars waiting to get into Brandon's graduation ceremony. There had been a list then, too, and once again, my name had not been on it. That time, I had chalked it up to clerical error, miscommunication, something mundane, something forgivable. But today was different. Today, someone had deliberately ensured my exclusion. The air buzzed with ceremony, the snap of shoes on stone, the hum of patriotic music from a distance, the rising cadence of celebration. Midshipmen in gleaming uniforms passed through the gate with purpose. Family members, mothers, fathers, wives adjusted hats and gripped camera straps, eyes bright with pride. I had served this institution, this country, for almost 2 decades, and now I was standing on the outside again. The sound of tires crackling against the gravel pulled my attention. A gleaming black SUV polished like a monument rolled to a stop before the gate. The back door opened. Brandon stepped out first, pristine in his whites, looking like the poster boy for honor and legacy. His hair was too perfect, not a strand out of place. He glanced at me, and for a heartbeat I thought, no. His mouth curled into that same smirk I'd seen since we were kids when he beat me at chess by cheating and pretended it was brilliance. He leaned into Caroline, who adjusted his collar like he was a prince preparing for coronation. She should have married someone in uniform instead of pushing paper, Brandon said casually, loud enough to reach the security guard and me both. Caroline gave a tight, amused smile. Behind them, my mother fluttered with the clasp of her necklace like it required surgical precision. My father didn't even glance in my direction, just pulled his sunglasses from the breast pocket of his blazer and put them on, as though I were a beam of light he needed to block out. They didn't stop, didn't ask questions, didn't offer explanations or embarrassment. They passed me as if I were scenery, a misaligned brick in the walkway, a shadow on a sunny day. The guard hesitated, watching them disappear past the gates, unsure if he should apologize again. He didn't need to. I stood there, straight-backed, silent, a statue carved from old loyalty and newer ice. My father used to say that dignity was measured by how one carries defeat. I had carried it for a long time, but today the weight pressed differently. It wasn't sadness. It wasn't rage. It was something harder, sharper, a quiet resolve that no longer sought permission to exist. I didn't cry. There were no trembling hands or soft gasps of hurt, just breath, controlled, steady, inhale, exhale. I'd stood before Congress and field commanders and foreign military attachés. I'd led Black Ops briefings in rooms so confidential the doors locked behind you with a hiss. And yet nothing prepared you for the cold sting of familial erasure. Nothing trained you to be invisible to the people who raised you. I turned slightly toward the manicured lawn behind the fence. The distant white canopy was already filling with high-ranking officers and guests. Their shoes glinted in the sun. Laughter floated on the breeze, civilized and blind. For a moment, I let the memory of another day float into view. The first time I wore my whites fresh out of OCS, beaming with a commission I'd earned on my own. My father had shaken my hand like I was a stranger. My mother had called my decision unladylike in private and brave in public. Brandon had laughed. That same laugh. That same smirk. I shifted my weight, the metals beneath my coat pressing against my ribs. So many years of service, quiet, classified, invisible, even in victory. But not today. The sudden hum of a powerful engine broke the spell. Heads turned. A sleek black sedan, low, unmarked, unmistakable in its authority, glided into view. It didn't stop at the checkpoint. It rolled forward slow and deliberate until it parked just feet away from me. The rear door opened. A polished black shoe touched the pavement. Then another. A tall figure emerged, silver epaulets gleaming under the morning sun. 4 stars. Straight spine. Steeled gaze. He didn't glance around. He walked directly, unmistakably toward me. And for the first time all morning, someone saw me. They didn't forget me by accident. I was never part of the story to begin with. The thought wasn't bitter. Not anymore. It wasn't a revelation either. It was a truth so old and worn it barely sparked emotion. It simply was. I stood just outside the Naval Academy's gate, but in my mind the steel vanished, and the sharp spring air shifted into the dense, lazy heat of a summer 15 years ago. The smell of grilling meat, the clink of ice in sweating glasses, the chatter of officers in khakis and retirees in polo shirts dotted with flags. Backyard patriotism in full bloom. It was 2009, and Brandon had just received his acceptance letter from the Academy. The envelope was thick, official, and carried all the gravitas my father had ever dreamed of. The moment he opened it, the neighborhood transformed. Within hours, our lawn was a battlefield of folding chairs and coolers, our deck brimming with laughter, high fives, and too much sun. Brandon, our future Admiral, someone had toasted, raising a can of Bud Light in salute. My father grinned like the war had already been won. He slapped Brandon's back with such pride I half expected him to mount a flag right then and there. And me, I stood on the sidelines in a sundress that felt too tight at the shoulders. Not from the fit, from the tension that had lodged itself there. I clutched a small black case in both hands, my fingers tracing its smooth edges over and over again. Inside was a medal, a real one. A National Cryptography Award. First place. Government-sponsored. Judged by experts from NSA and MIT. My name etched into a gold-plated disc suspended on a navy ribbon. I had worked for it silently during summer nights lit only by laptop glow and determination. I thought foolishly that it might matter. But the party didn't slow down for achievements without a uniform. I waited for a lull in the conversation. There wasn't one. My father was flipping burgers, a beer balanced in one hand like a seasoned multitasker. His voice carried over the lawn like he was briefing a unit praising Brandon's raw instinct and natural command presence. I stepped beside him. "Dad?" He glanced down briefly, distracted. "Hey, Claire, I opened the case." The metal caught a slant of sunlight and flashed between us. I won first. The cryptography challenge. He paused, blinked once, nodded. "Good job, sweetie." Then turned back to the grill. "Hey, Tom, grab more buns from the cooler." "Will ya?" I stood there. The case still opened, the metal suddenly too heavy. The praise hadn't landed, it had ricocheted. Later that afternoon, the cake arrived. It was enormous, sheet-sized, with frosting so white it almost glowed. Bright blue letters piped across the top spelled "Congratulations, future Admiral Brandon Walsh." There was no room left for my name, no second line, no sliver of space. I stared at it longer than I should have until the edges of the letters blurred and my mother gently nudged me to help serve slices. That night, after the paper plates had been tossed and the deck lights dimmed, I crept upstairs with the medal still in my hand. The house was quiet, thick with the aftertaste of celebration. My room hadn't changed much since high school. Old posters on the wall. A desk cluttered with college textbooks. I opened the wooden keepsake box at the back of my closet. The one lined with childhood trinkets, a dried corsage, a silver dollar, from Grandpa a ribbon from a middle school science fair. I nestled the medal inside, laid it flat like something being interred, then closed the lid slowly. Not out of shame, out of understanding. My wins weren't the kind that earned barbecues or banners. They didn't inspire speeches or tears. They weren't loud. They didn't shine under spotlights. They made no sound when they arrived, and even less when they were ignored. So I buried them. Every time my father talked about legacy, about service, about duty, it was through Brandon's lens, not mine. Every time my mother referred to success, she meant a wedding band, a baby, a man in uniform. Not codes cracked at 3 a.m. Not intelligence briefings I couldn't tell her about. Not me. Brandon was the main story. I was the footnote. Maybe not even that. Maybe I was just formatting. Back in the present, the wind shifted again. The sound of a bugle echoed faintly from within the gates. I didn't flinch. From where I stood, the guard was still at his post, still glancing nervously toward me now and then, as if worried I'd cause a scene, demand something, protest. But I had nothing to prove. Not today. Let them think I'm just spreadsheets. I'll bury them with silence. They see me pushing paper. What they don't see is how that paper moved a SEAL team out of a kill zone. The air inside the tank was chilled and metallic, humming with the sound of filtered air and machine breath. A thick silence cloaked the space, broken only by quiet voices speaking in clipped codes and the soft tap of keystrokes. Every sound here had purpose. No idle chatter. No wasted syllables. I stood at the command console, the curved wall of screens casting a pale light across my face. Satellites, thermal feeds, decrypted comms, and digital overlays blinked in synchronized tension. We were 6 hours into a classified operation in the Red Sea. 18 civilian hostages were aboard an oil freighter overtaken by a group of armed pirates. Viper 1, our SEAL extraction team, was en route. Thermal scan updated. Gina, my lead analyst, called from her workstation. 7 hostiles confirmed on deck. Hostages held at midship under heavy guard. I nodded. Copy. Reyes, you have visual. His voice crackled in my earpiece, gravelly calm, field-worn. Affirmative, ma'am. 2 minutes out. Winds low. Water still. They're not expecting fast movers. That was the plan until something on the southern radar feed caught my eye. A small vessel. Unregistered. No AIS ping. Moving too slow for cargo, too deliberate for local fishermen. And cold. No thermal signature on the hull, which only meant one thing: someone knew how to mask their heat. I stepped closer to the screen. Magnify stern vector. 10 nautical miles. Gina's fingers danced over her keys. The image sharpened a flat profile boat low in the water, drifting toward the freighter's blind spot. Give me thermal inside that hull. The screen flickered. Then 6 distinct heat plumes. Armed, moving. Ghost boat, I said aloud. Secondary force, ambush. My heart kicked against my ribs, but my voice remained steady. Reyes, abort breach. I repeat, abort. You got company at your 6. Cold boat approaching. 6 tangos. Ambush setup. Silence for 2 seconds. Then copy. Disengaging. Moving to fallback. That's a damn good catch, Admiral. Relief rippled across the room, invisible, but tangible. I exhaled, stepping back slightly, letting the adrenaline drain without showing it. One wrong call, and we would have been watching a kill box unfold on live feed. Instead, lives were saved. My team leaned back, tension unwinding from their shoulders. Daniel Reyes would make it home tonight. So would 17 civilians and the rest of Viper 1. And no one outside this room would ever know why. Except 5 seconds later, my personal phone buzzed. The vibration snaked its way up my spine like a slap. I didn't need to check the sender. The timing was always uncanny. Brandon. The screen lit up bright in the low light. The text read, "Enjoying your museum weekend in D.C. Sis, hope the paperwork's thrilling." I stared at it, the insult as effortless as it was predictable. His tone, that familiar mockery layered in ignorance, had no idea what room I was standing in, what command I had just issued. He probably thought I spent my nights organizing color-coded files, sipping lattes, and adjusting fonts on spreadsheets. I locked the phone and set it face down on the counter, letting silence reclaim the space. You don't even know I saved your life. The words weren't for him. They were for me. A reminder. A confession. A fact too heavy to be spoken aloud. Because the ghost boat in the Red Sea wasn't just targeting civilians. We'd picked up chatter weeks prior, a planned demonstration strike. American personnel. A named target if verified intel was accurate. Lieutenant Commander Brandon Walsh. His destroyer had been docked just miles from the freighter's path. And the SEAL team, they'd been rerouted when the threat map shifted. Brandon wouldn't know. Couldn't know. And if he ever did, I doubted he'd believe it. That was the burden of this job. Your biggest wins lived in silence. I turned back to the screens, letting my focus absorb the analytics now rolling in. Confirmed hostages safe, enemy boat intercepted and neutralized by a secondary drone sweep. Operation complete. The room began to shift, not with applause or backslaps, but with that sacred rhythm of quiet professionals knowing they'd done their job right. As I stepped out of the tank's main chamber, the stark corridor welcomed me like a steel tunnel into nowhere. But I was used to that. Used to fading back into invisibility after bending the world by a few degrees. A young lieutenant jogged toward me, crisp in uniform and slightly out of breath. "Ma'am," he said, saluting, "General Beckett requests your presence at the Pentagon. He asked for you by name. In person." I blinked once. That hadn't happened in years. I nodded. "ETA vehicles waiting outside, ma'am." I didn't need to ask what it was about. When 4-star generals summon you the morning after a go stop, it's never just coffee. They erased me from their guest list. Beckett wants to add me to history. The office smelled of leather and old books. A kind of reverence embedded in every stitch of the carpet, every polished corner of the cherrywood desk. No awards cluttered the shelves. No photos of grandchildren or rounds of golf. Just maps. Operational photos. And one wall entirely devoted to the lineage of naval intelligence faces framed in sepia and silver. I stood with my hands behind my back chin, up every instinct from 2 decades of service alert inside me. General Elijah Beckett, 4-star, weathered but unbending, didn't gesture for me to sit right away. Instead, he studied me from behind his desk eyes like steel behind rimless glasses. "They cut you from the list," he said simply, voice quiet. "No judgment, no sympathy, just truth." "Yes, sir." I didn't blink. He leaned back, the chair creaking slightly beneath his broad frame. "Your family's always had a narrow view of service. That's generous." A faint smile ghosted across his face. "They've confused visibility with valor." He stood, then walked to the window overlooking the Pentagon's central courtyard, that strange, solemn, geometric garden of bureaucracy and power. I watched the light shift on his shoulders as he spoke. "Operation Blackwater is being partially declassified," he said, turning back to me. "It's official. We pushed it through last night." Something in my chest flinched. Blackwater had been the apex. A 5-year intelligence war waged without a single bullet fired. I had built it piece by piece from whispers and shadows, dismantling a covert financing network for terror cells across 3 continents. It had nearly broken me. And now, for the first time, it would exist outside the vault. "They're awarding you the Distinguished Service Medal," he continued, his voice even. My breath caught. I masked it. "Sir, you heard me." He moved back to the desk, picked up a file, thin dark red embossed with gold. He placed it gently before me. "The president signed it himself. I didn't reach for it. I couldn't. Not yet." "I don't do this lightly, Claire," he said. "You've served this country in silence for nearly 20 years. There's honor in anonymity, yes. But sometimes, visibility isn't vanity. It's correction." "And the ceremony?" I asked. His eyes glinted. "We want to present the medal at Annapolis, at your brother's event." I stared at him. "I don't know for how long." He didn't flinch. "You're serious. Deadly." My hands were still behind my back, but my fingers curled into my palms. "Sir, that'll look like retaliation. A spectacle." Or he said it'll look like justice. The silence between us thickened. My mind raced through every press briefing I'd ghostwritten, every anonymous success tucked into back-channel cables, every time I had let them believe I was nothing more than a Pentagon spreadsheet jockey. "I don't want them to see it coming," I said. Beckett tilted his head. "Meaning no heads up, no official family notices. I want to see their real faces." A pause. Then the corner of his mouth ticked upward. "Good," he said, "because I wasn't planning on warning them." We both stood in that stillness, a quiet agreement passing between us, the kind only soldiers of long wars could share. Then slowly he opened the file, slid a photo across the desk. It was grainy, clearly taken mid-action, a man being hauled into a helicopter, bleeding but alive. CPO Daniel Reyes. He owes you his life, Beckett said. I'd like him to be there. We'll handle his travel discreetly. Reyes. The voice in my ear during the Red Sea op. Calm, steady. Trusting me with his team's lives. He had never seen my face. Never knew who I was. Until now. Beckett tapped the photo once, then folded it back into the file. You ready? I didn't nod. I didn't speak. I simply met his eyes, and for the first time in weeks, I saw something close to equilibrium return to my spine. I was ready. And so were they. Whether they knew it or not. He told a story that earned a medal. I remember a version that almost cost lives. Brandon stood on the stage as if it had been built just for him, not by design but by destiny. The sun caught the edge of his dress blues, throwing reflections off the ribbons across his chest, some earned, some stretched thin by narrative inflation. The audience leaned forward, rapt. Cameras clicked in respectful bursts. Even the breeze seemed to wait for his words. I sat in the front VIP row, expression unreadable, 2 silver stars gleaming at my shoulders. Nobody noticed. Nobody dared look too closely. They were too fixated on the golden boy. My deployment in the Gulf, Brandon began. His voice, warm, practiced, utterly sincere, wasn't just about tactics or hardware. It was about human instinct, about knowing when to act, even when the data told you otherwise. My breath stayed still like a stone in my chest. He was talking about the tanker incident, the same one I'd coordinated from 2 floors beneath the Pentagon, huddled with a team of analysts and a headset full of chaos. He was referring to a night where misreading thermal data could have sent SEALs straight into an ambush. And he had misread it. I had the report. I had lived it. In the version he gave, now Brandon had spotted an irregularity on his own initiative, redirected the strike vector, and ensured the safe extraction of all hostages. In reality, the irregularity was a ghost vessel. It had approached silently, uncharted, hidden behind maritime noise. The only reason anyone noticed was because my team overrode a naval AI filter seconds before the breach. My voice had broken through his unit's comms just in time. Abort. Pull back. You're being led into a kill box. But in this telling, there was no analyst, no cold room, no command from the shadows. Just Brandon. Calm under pressure, sharp as ever. The applause swelled as he smiled modestly and dipped his head. My parents looked ready to cry. My mother actually dabbed at her eyes with a lace-trimmed handkerchief she probably brought for this very moment. Behind them, seated alone in the back row, a man in civilian clothes leaned forward slightly. Daniel Reyes. He didn't clap. He didn't shift. But his gaze was locked on me. Not Brandon, his dark eyes narrowed with understanding recognition. He had never seen my face during the mission. Now, as the man who owed me his life, he watched in silence as the man who nearly cost it stood in stolen spotlight. Claire Walsh, Admiral, Claire Walsh still didn't exist to any of them. Not yet. Beckett sat 2 seats to my left. He hadn't moved once during Brandon's speech, but I saw his fingers trace something under his coat, a small timepiece, probably his father's. When he checked it, I knew what it meant. It was time. Brandon wrapped up with a flourish. And to every service member who knows the weight of command, I share this medal with you. Thank you. Thunderous applause. Brandon bowed slightly, stepped back from the podium. Flashbulbs popped. Beckett stood. No one expected it. No script had mentioned it. The sudden movement of a 4-star general rising in full regalia pulled attention like gravity. Even Brandon blinked in confusion, glancing toward the audience for answers he wouldn't find. Beckett's expression was unreadable, but there was something volcanic behind his stillness, a force long held in reserve. He took a single step forward, and I exhaled. Slow, measured, final. This was it. Every word he said was a story. Now comes the chapter they never saw coming. Beckett approached the podium with the easy gravity of a man who didn't need to raise his voice to command the room. Conversations died instantly. Officers straightened. Civilians blinked in curiosity. Brandon took a small, confused step back, unsure whether to remain standing or sit. The MC caught off guard, shuffled his note cards, eyes darting to confirm this wasn't part of the published agenda. Beckett didn't wait. He never did. There are heroes whose names we know. He began, voice low but amplified by the eerie quiet now blanketing the outdoor amphitheater. And then there are those we never see. No parades, no documentaries, no medals, not publicly at least. I didn't blink. I didn't move. My hands were steady in my lap. From the second row of VIP seating, I watched the entire sea of heads turn slowly toward him, the ripple of curiosity thickening. Beckett continued, eyes sweeping the audience like radar. Some victories don't come with fireworks or fanfare. They come in silence. In decisions made in seconds that ripple across continents. In intelligence sifted from static. In warnings issued moments before a catastrophe. A murmur began, faint but growing. Somewhere in the middle rows, a vice admiral leaned toward his aide. A camera crew adjusted focus. The tone of the event had changed. Gone was the breezy metal circuit. This was something else. Operation Blackwater, Beckett said. The air stiffened. Even those who had never heard the codename recognized its weight, the cadence of something classified, something heavy. Brandon shifted uneasily. Thomas leaned forward. My mother Elaine tilted her head like someone trying to catch a whisper from a language she didn't understand. Blackwater, Beckett said again, was an intelligence operation that spanned 5 years, 22 countries, and more lives saved than I can count. It dismantled terror financing webs so intricate even our allies couldn't see them. It prevented attacks before the explosives were ever packed. And in one case, a single decision made inside a windowless room, it saved a SEAL team from walking straight into an ambush. Daniel Reyes in the far back row stood, slowly, quietly. His hands remained at his sides, but his eyes never left me. Beckett's voice dropped softer now, more intimate. There is a reason most of you have never heard of this operation. Its architect served not for praise, but because the mission demanded it. Because this nation is still held together by a rare breed, those who do the work without needing the credit. Every uniformed officer in the front rows was still as granite. They knew what was coming, not the details, but the weight. They could feel the shift. Beckett looked down at the podium for the briefest second, then raised his gaze again and locked eyes with me. I stood. The sound was almost nothing, just the subtle rustle of fabric as I rose to my full height. My white uniform catching the sun in sharp angles, the 2 silver stars on my shoulder boards unmistakable. Ladies and gentlemen, Beckett said, voice ringing out like a verdict, please welcome Rear Admiral Claire Walsh. For one suspended second, there was silence. Then the entire front block of uniformed officers rose in unison. A wall of white and navy and gold, a synchronized salute that rippled like a shockwave through the ranks. It wasn't applause. It was recognition. Protocol. Tribute. Not to a name. To a truth finally seen. I walked forward, slow, steady, each step striking the concrete with clarity. I didn't look left or right. I didn't search for faces in the crowd. But I felt it. The freezing stillness behind me, the way my father's lungs forgot how to breathe, the rigid disbelief in Brandon's spine, the stunned paralysis gripping my mother's hands in her lap. They didn't stand. They couldn't. Only 3 remained seated, as if rising meant acknowledging everything they had spent years denying. Daniel Reyes stepped forward before the civilians even knew what to do. He was the first to stand, and though he wore no uniform, his salute was slow, deliberate, unflinching. I met his eyes, gave a nod, then turned to face the podium. It wasn't applause I needed. It was the sound of silence after the truth lands. The weight of my boots against the stage floor felt more grounded than gravity itself. I stood at the center, the sun directly overhead, casting no shadows, not behind me, not ahead. The silence was cathedral-like. No one dared breathe too loudly. Somewhere a seagull called in the distance, absurdly ordinary against the seismic shift unfolding before hundreds of military dignitaries, media cameras, and most satisfying of all, the family that had always claimed I was nothing. General Beckett stood beside me, a black velvet box in hand. His expression was unreadable to the untrained eye, but I caught the glint in it, the satisfaction of delivering a long overdue justice. With deliberate care, he opened the box and withdrew the metal gold and crimson radiant in the noon sun, the Distinguished Service Medal. Few wore it, fewer earned it. Beckett stepped forward. Rear Admiral Claire Walsh, he said, his voice ringing clear across the grounds for exceptionally meritorious service to the security of the United States, and for operations whose complexity, sensitivity, and stakes required not only strategic brilliance but unshakable resolve. It is my privilege to award you the Navy's Distinguished Service Medal. His hands were steady as he pinned the honor above my left breast just below the stars on my shoulder. The fabric accepted it like it had been waiting for this moment all along. A murmur rippled through the crowd, not disbelief anymore, something heavier. Realization. Beckett didn't stop there. She saved over 5,000 lives in 3 years, he continued, facing the audience now. She dismantled 5 major global threats before they could escalate. She coordinated a network of operatives in 38 countries. She led a war you never saw, not because it wasn't real, but because she made sure you'd never have to. I didn't shift. I didn't smile. I let the words land like quiet detonations, one after another. Beckett paused just long enough for people to exhale, and then casually, he dropped the next strike. And last year, it was her team's real-time intelligence that diverted a coordinated missile ambush in the Strait of Hormuz, saving the crew of the USS Rockford. A collective inhale. The USS Rockford. Brandon's ship. I saw him even before I turned a ripple of motion at the corner of my vision. His posture had gone rigid. His skin was ghost-pale, lips parted slightly. He didn't blink. Beckett, unbothered, let it sit. And then came the final blow. One of the lives she saved? He said, letting the silence stretch like drawn steel, was sitting on this very stage just an hour ago. It was an execution in slow motion. No blood, no scream, just the total collapse of a lie built over decades. There was no need to name Brandon. Everyone understood. The officers seated behind us leaned forward ever so slightly. Some turned to look. Others didn't have to. My eyes found him. He tried not to look. He failed. For 2 full seconds we locked eyes. He blinked first. Not out of respect. Out of panic. He looked away as if the sight of me burned. As if the truth now made flesh was something he couldn't stand to hold. The applause came next, and not the hollow, performative kind I'd heard all my life. This was different. It started slow, a few hands at the front. Then it rolled backward, sweeping the crowd in a tidal wave of reverence. Officers, civilians, even skeptical journalists rose to their feet. Everyone stood except 3. Thomas, Elaine, Brandon. They remained seated statues in a flood. The tide moved around them, unacknowledged and unmoved. Beckett gestured toward the microphone. I stepped forward, ignoring the tightness in my chest, the sting in my eyes that would never turn into tears. My deepest thanks, I began, voice steady, clipped, practiced. To the intelligence officers who work in shadows, to the operatives who trust us without knowing our names, to the teams who never make the headlines, but make all the difference. I paused, just for a heartbeat, and then delivered the cut. And to my family, past or present, a long breath. I have only one thing to say. My team is my home. Then I stepped back. 1 pace, no bow, no smile. Only silence stretching like the distance between who I used to be and who they never saw coming. They thought I betrayed them by staying silent. But it was their noise that kept me quiet. The clatter of celebration still echoed down the academy halls. Laughter glasses clinking, the brass band muffled by marble and thick doors. But in the windowless conference room, the silence pressed in like a seal, airtight and unrelenting. The aide who'd escorted us closed the door quietly, leaving me alone with them. Brandon was pacing already, jaw clenched, dress blues, impeccable eyes wild. Thomas sat rigid in one of the leather chairs, arms crossed so tightly across his chest they seemed stitched there. Elaine stood behind him, lips parted but silent, her hands twisting the corner of a monogrammed handkerchief she hadn't used since the moment Beckett called my name. Brandon turned first, voice rising before I even drew breath. "You made us look like fools." The words landed flat. Not because they lacked force, but because I'd heard versions of them since I was 10. This was just louder, sweatier, more panicked. I didn't flinch. "You didn't need help with that," I said calmly. "I just stopped playing along." His face contorted. "You planned this, all of it, the medal, the speech, the stage. You think I asked Beckett to declassify Blackwater?" I raised an eyebrow. To summon congressmen, media, half the Joint Chiefs. Thomas's voice cut in low, gravelly. You lied to us. My eyes snapped to his. He was still the same man who had once told me cryptography was a hobby, not a calling. Still the man who had never asked a single real question about my career, but had memorized every deployment detail of Brandon's before the ink dried. No, I said. I stopped explaining myself to people who decided not to listen. Elaine stepped forward, voice tremulous. Claire, please. We were trying to protect you. We didn't want you burdened by don't. I said sharp enough to make her blink. Don't you dare cry right now. Her face crumbled anyway, eyes brimming. I never wanted you to feel alone. You didn't have to want it, I said quietly. You just had to ignore me while it happened. Brandon had stopped pacing. He looked stunned not by my words, but maybe by hearing me say them aloud. Like a glass he thought couldn't break finally shattered in front of him. Thomas shifted in his seat, then said in a tone that was all salt and steel. You embarrassed this family. That made me laugh soft and bitter. You mean by existing without your permission? He stood abruptly, a fist clenched. You could have told us. You owed us that. I took a step closer, my voice like ice cracking beneath boots. I saved your son's life, and none of you asked what I'd do. You asked when I'd get married. Silence. A heavy, rotted silence. Elaine's lips parted, but no sound emerged. Brandon looked at me like I'd slapped him, like he was seeing a person he didn't know and didn't want to. And then salvation. My secure phone buzzed against my side, the vibration unmistakable. I pulled it from the pouch under my coat, the screen glowing with a single message Admiral Walsh priority read. Secure comms awaiting. Immediate response required. I looked up. Brandon's mouth had opened perhaps for another protest. I didn't wait. I have to take this, I said, voice once again. Crisp, composed, crystalline. It's critical. I turned toward the door, pausing only long enough to let one last truth settle between us. I'm not leaving because I'm angry, I said, hand on the knob. I'm leaving because this moment matters less than the world outside of it. I opened the door, and just before stepping through, I looked over my shoulder and delivered the quiet kill shot. When you're ready to speak to me like I matter, not like I broke some illusion, you'll know how to reach me. Then I left the sound of my heels slicing the silence behind me. Once they shut a gate on me. Today, I walked through it under escort. The light had shifted, no longer sharp and ceremonial, but golden forgiving, the kind of light that stretched shadows long and painted the edges of the Naval Academy's red brick with amber. My heels struck the granite floor of the rotunda with calm, deliberate rhythm as I exited the building. No more applause, no fanfare, just the steady hush of an afternoon settling into its final chapter. The main doors swung open ahead of me. Outside, the white tent from the reception was already half dismantled, folding chairs stacked, silver trays of untouched hors d'oeuvres quietly wheeled away by enlisted staff. And at the edge of the plaza near the flagpole stood the family I once orbited like a dying star. Thomas Walsh, Elaine Walsh, Brandon Walsh. No one said a word. They stood together like a portrait, still as statues carved in disbelief and unprocessed guilt. Elaine clutched her purse as though it were an anchor. My father stared straight ahead, unmoving. Brandon looked like he'd been punched an hour ago and was still trying to find the floor beneath him. I kept walking. The black sedan waited with the door open. A military aide, polished and precise, held it for me. Beyond the vehicle, the main gate, the one that had once served as a wall, now stood wide open. No hesitation. No clipboard. No challenge. My shoes paused on the last stone between them and me. I turned. They flinched as if expecting more. I'm not angry. I said, my voice soft but clear. I'm not here to shame you. I don't need that. Elaine blinked too slowly, her eyes still swollen from earlier tears. Brandon shifted like he was bracing for impact. But if we speak again, I continued, it will be on a foundation of truth. No illusions, no titles, no roles. My father's jaw clenched. A flicker of something passed through Brandon's face, not resentment, not pride, something in between. And if that can't happen, I said, taking one final breath of the familiar salt air, let silence be enough. I turned back toward the car. Beckett stood beside the open door, arms behind his back. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His eyes met mine, and in that gaze was everything I had fought for: recognition, respect, and the kind of quiet that only exists between people who have faced wars in places no one else saw. He gave a crisp salute. I returned it, fluid and full, then ducked into the back seat. The aide shut the door behind me with a soft, deliberate click. The car pulled forward slowly. My reflection hovered faintly in the tinted window, flanked by sunlight and sharp angles of my uniform. As we passed the flagpole, I allowed myself one glance, just one, toward the rearview mirror. Brandon had taken a single step forward, his posture uncertain, as if torn between impulse and inertia. But he didn't call out, didn't move again. He just stood there, caught in the moment between revelation and reckoning. My phone buzzed. I slipped it from the holster with practiced ease and pressed it to my ear. "Admiral Walsh," I said evenly. "I'm en route." The applause faded, but the echo stayed. It wasn't pride. It was silence, thick and unspeakable. The soft thunk of bourbon hitting crystal was the only sound in my apartment. Outside, Washington, D.C. pulsed with its usual quiet chaos: distant sirens, faint honks, the rhythmic hum of traffic on wet pavement. Inside, it was still. Too still. I held the glass to my lips but didn't drink. The burn could wait. I stood at the window looking out over the low-lit skyline, the reflection of my own uniform ghosted faintly in the glass. I hadn't changed. Not yet. Somehow it felt too abrupt to shed the fabric that had finally revealed the weight I'd carried all these years. A notification buzzed on the secure line. Incoming call. Jen Beckett, D. I tapped the earpiece. "Admiral Walsh." Claire Beckett's voice was lower than usual, not clipped or official, just present. "You okay?" I took a slow sip before answering. The bourbon was sharp and bitter, but clean. It grounded me. "I don't know what this feeling is," I said. "It's not pride, it's not anger, it's not even relief. That's what happens," he said softly, "when you finally stop shrinking." I closed my eyes. The words settled deeper than I wanted to admit. "You were brilliant today," he added after a pause. "You didn't flinch. Not once." "I didn't have anything left to flinch with," I said. "Just silence. And stars." "That's silence," he replied, voice threaded with meaning. "That's the space you earned. Fill it with what you want, not what they gave you." The line went quiet a second longer, then disconnected without another word. I held the empty glass for a long time. Then another buzz. Not the secure line, just a text. "Unknown sender. I'm alive because of you." That's all the applause I need to give. Dr. Daniel Reyes. Quiet. Understated. Just like before. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. Across the room sat the old wooden box. I hadn't opened it in over a decade, but I hadn't thrown it away either. It was where I'd buried the part of me that wanted to be seen. Childhood ribbons, my national cryptography medal, a faded drawing I'd once made of my family with my figure left uncolored. I knelt beside it. The latch clicked open with a sound I remembered too well. The contents were still neat, preserved with the care of someone desperate to protect what the world refused to value. Not anymore. I stood and carried the box to the small fireplace, the one I rarely used, except on holidays or bad days. Today wasn't bad. It was just the end of something. One by one, I fed the past into the flames, the metal, the drawing. The note from my mother that once said, "You'll always be our quiet star. Let it burn." I watched until nothing was left but ash and warped brass, the past curling into smoke. It didn't feel like a funeral. It felt like a door closing, one I would never knock on again. I stood in the afterglow for a long time. No tears, no anger. Just that same echoing silence that had followed me since the ceremony. But now it didn't suffocate me. It gave me space. I was no longer waiting to be chosen. I was no longer waiting to be named. On my way back to the desk, my tablet pinged a new encrypted email. Subject: Internal Pentagon Restructure, requesting Admiral Walsh's input. I stared at the line for a long second. This wasn't victory. This was release. Brandon asked to meet. No pretense, no stage, just a table and 2 chairs, for once equal ground. It was a narrow cafe tucked behind an art gallery in DuPont Circle. Quiet, unremarkable, the kind of place where powerful people met to talk without making news. A bell chimed softly as I entered. The scent of espresso and citrus cleaner lingered in the air. Outside, DC buzzed in its usual way, but in here, time paused. Brandon was already seated. He wore a civilian blazer, no ribbons, no stripes, no medals. He looked smaller without the uniform, or maybe it was the absence of applause. A half-drunk coffee sat in front of him, lukewarm, ignored. When he saw me, he stood a little too fast, then hesitated like he wasn't sure what to do with his hands. I sat down. No handshake. "Thanks for coming," he said. I nodded. "You asked." He stared at the table for a long second, fingers tracing the grain of the wood. "I don't know how to talk to you anymore," he said, finally, voice low. "Then try," I replied, as if I were someone you respected. He blinked. Not wounded. Not defensive. Just absorbing. The silence between us stretched, but not painfully. It gave space. "I was angry," he said. "After the ceremony. Furious. You made me feel small." "No," I said. "I just stopped playing small." He swallowed, jaw tight. Then a breath escaped him, not a sigh, more like deflation. "It was never about you," he said. "All these years. It was me. Needing to win. To be the one Dad pointed at. The one Mom prayed for. I thought if I shone bright enough, no one would see the cracks." His voice wobbled just slightly. I didn't interrupt. For once he was actually speaking. Not performing, not deflecting. "I used you," he admitted, "to feel big. You were always smarter, colder, better. And I couldn't handle it. So I made jokes. Mocked your desk job. I knew you weren't pushing paper. I just didn't want to see it." I leaned back, letting his words land. "You don't have to lose," I said, "for me to matter." He looked up at me. Really looked like he was seeing a sister he hadn't allowed himself to know. "You were always steady," he said. "You carried more weight than I ever did. I got ribbons for the show. You carried the war. I carried the consequences," I said. "That's different." A server approached, left a fresh cup of coffee beside me, then disappeared as quickly as she came. I didn't touch it yet. "I've been thinking," Brandon said after a moment, "about command. About what Dad taught us, that it's about barking orders and standing tall." He looked down, hands clenched lightly. "Could you teach me?" he asked, "what leadership looks like when no one's watching?" That landed harder than any accusation. Not because of guilt, because it was honest. The first real question he'd asked me in our adult lives. I didn't answer. I just slid the untouched coffee cup toward him. A small gesture. No speeches. No medals. No uniform. "Start by listening," I said. "Apologies are like medals, heavy, shining, and sometimes too late." The dining room looked the same as it always had, soft amber lights, the smell of old oak and rosemary, the way the walls held every argument ever swallowed. But tonight, something was different. No voices. No declarations. Just forks clinking against porcelain. Elaine moved silently around the table, her motions methodical. When she placed the serving bowl near me, I noticed what it held: rosemary potatoes with lemon zest. My favorite. She didn't say a word, didn't make it a gesture. She just set it down like it had always been mine. Brandon sat across from me, unusually quiet. His eyes flickered once to mine, then dropped back to his plate. Whatever transformation had begun between us in that cafe weeks ago, he was letting it speak for itself. Then my father cleared his throat. That old gravel of authority. "I saw the specks on that medal," he said, not looking directly at me. "The distinguished service. That's rare." I sipped my water. "It's not about the medal, Dad." A long pause. "It's about the years before it." He nodded slowly. "Once. It wasn't agreement. More like admission." Elaine placed her napkin carefully on her lap, then said quietly, "We watched the ceremony again. On the official stream. No distractions. No crowd." She looked at me really. Looked not past or around me. "This time," she whispered, "we actually saw you." The words dropped into the room like a pebble in still water. No splash. Just ripples. I set down my fork. "I'm not asking you to understand everything," I said, steady. "You don't need to know what Blackwater was, or how many nights I didn't sleep because I was tracking human targets on 6 screens. Elaine's lips parted, but I held up a hand gently, not stopping her, just pausing the old pattern. I just need the erasing to stop, I said. No more pretending I was never there. No more looking through me at family barbecues. No more silence when my name doesn't show up. The room was so still I could hear the furnace click on downstairs. Thomas stood up abruptly. For a second, I thought it was over, that he couldn't hear it, couldn't sit with it. But he left the dining room without a word. Elaine's hands trembled slightly on her napkin. Moments passed. Then he returned. In his hands was a photo, an 8 by 10 print, matte finished, no frame. He walked around the table and placed it in front of me. It was the moment on stage. Beckett pinning the medal to my chest. The flag behind us. My shoulders squared. The light catching the silver stars. We had this printed, he said, voice. Quiet eyes, unreadable. Didn't want it online. Didn't want noise around it. I ran my fingers lightly over the image. It was crisp, intentional, preserved. Why this one, I asked. His answer came slower than I expected. Because it's the first time I saw someone who didn't need us to clap to stand tall. The furnace clicked off. A silence followed, not cold this time, but open. No forgiveness was offered. But something else sat between us now. Recognition. And maybe for the first time, the beginnings of a new truth. Dinner used to be a performance. This time, no one's auditioning. The dining table was still the same long stretch of dark walnut, still polished to a mirror sheen. The chairs hadn't changed. The overhead light hummed faintly, and the scent of roast chicken lingered like a familiar refrain. But for once, there were no invisible scripts in the air. No unspoken cues about who got to speak and who got cut off. It felt strangely like dinner. Elaine raised her wineglass not as a matriarch presiding over a ceremony, but as a woman who had let something go and was lighter for it. To the strength of all the Walsh children, she said, voice, clear eyes steady. Each of you in your own way earned more than we ever understood. Brandon clinked glasses with me first, a gesture that once might have been performative, but tonight felt intentional, sincere. And then Daniel Reyes, who had arrived wearing a modest navy sport coat and a soft smile, raised his own glass. I owe my life to one of them, he said. Claire, I've said it before, I'll say it again. That call that override it gave me a second chance. Gave all of us one. I nodded, no longer shrinking from the words. I'd carried them alone too long to reject them now. The dinner moved in quiet rhythm. Brandon spoke next, describing a new onboard protocol for chain-of-command decisions. He didn't dominate the table, just shared. I pulled some of your principles into it, he said, glancing my way. Decentralized intel routing, team-level autonomy. It's working. I smiled. You always knew how to execute fast. Now you're making room for thinking. He gave a short, almost sheepish laugh, trying. Thomas, who'd spent most of the meal quiet, finally leaned forward, elbows on the table, fingers steepled like he used to when starting a strategy debrief. The military's changing, he said. For years, I thought if we didn't hold the line, tradition would vanish. But maybe I mistook inertia for strength. I said nothing for a beat. Just met his eyes and held them. Change doesn't erase the past, I said, but it rewrites what comes next. Elaine reached for my hand. It was a light touch, but steady. We want to be part of what comes next, Claire. After dessert, a peach cobbler I recognized from childhood but hadn't tasted in years, Elaine gestured toward the hallway. There's something we've adjusted, she said. I followed her into the hall, where the family display case stood once a shrine to medals earned by the men of the Walsh line. I had passed it hundreds of times over the years, each time a quiet reminder that my story didn't belong there. Now the glass glinted with new symmetry. My Distinguished Service Medal sat at eye level beside Thomas's old citations and campaign ribbons. Framed beside it was the photograph from Annapolis, Beckett pinning the medal to my chest, the flag behind us. It wasn't tucked in a corner. It wasn't subtle. It was central. Elaine stepped beside me. Not above. Not below, she said softly. Just finally. Beside. The case had not erased the past, but it had changed its posture. So had we. I used to wonder what closure felt like. Turns out it's just peace and a full breath. The room smelled faintly of new paint and burnt coffee, typical for a briefing wing in transition. The Pentagon never truly stopped moving, not even in the spring. Light filtered through the narrow windows in pale, focused beams, catching on polished brass and insignias stitched into crisp collars. Claire stood at the front of the room, her posture relaxed but commanding, hands resting loosely behind her back. The screen behind her displayed a simple heading, Strategic Command in Unseen Environments, a topic she once mastered in shadows, now taught in daylight. 12 officers sat in the semicircle before her. Some were seasoned, a few looked barely out of the academy. Among them, a young woman in a fresh uniform sat stiffly as if afraid to exhale. Claire scanned their faces, let the silence stretch a few seconds longer than expected. It wasn't to intimidate, just to remind them that the world didn't always announce itself with urgency. Some of the most important moments began in stillness. When I first joined, Claire said, her voice steady, I was told to stay in my lane. That support roles don't shape outcomes. That visibility was power. She let her gaze settle on the youngest woman. They were wrong. One hand went up, hesitant, trembling. How did you know you belonged, ma'am? The woman asked, her voice barely louder than the hum of the air conditioning. With all due respect, what made you stay? Claire's reply came without pause. Not rehearsed, just real. When I stopped waiting for permission. There was a beat of silence. Then something like breath relief passed through the room. As the seminar wrapped, Claire gave a short nod and stepped aside. Her aides gathered the materials. The officers filed out with murmured thank yous. The young woman lingered a moment longer, offering a salute. Claire returned it. Then she turned toward the exit. The courtyard outside was washed in the amber gold of late afternoon sun. Spring had arrived early this year. The wind was gentle, warm enough to carry the faint scent of cherry blossoms from somewhere farther off. Claire stepped out into the open, her heels soft against the stone pathway. She didn't rush. There was no longer anything to flee or prove. A breeze caught the hem of her coat, lifting it just enough for the 2 silver stars on her shoulders to catch the light. They gleamed not loudly, not demanding attention, but clearly, undeniably. By the gate stood a woman in civilian clothes, maybe mid-30s. Claire couldn't tell if she was military, a family member, or simply someone who had waited too long for something she didn't name. Their eyes met. The woman without hesitation raised a hand in a salute. Claire paused, walked 2 steps closer. You don't need a uniform to have honor, she said, her voice even. Then added, just as the light shifted again, but if you wear one, wear it for something real. The woman nodded, her expression unreadable. Claire turned the stars on her shoulders, shimmering once more. She kept walking. Not to escape the past, but because it no longer anchored her. And this time, no one stood in her way. She didn't need a stage anymore, just the quiet certainty of walking forward without apology. The people who once silenced her were now left behind, staring at the space where her shadow used to shrink. Justice didn't arrive with fanfare, but with truth, steady, undeniable, and earned. Like the final chord of a long-forgotten melody, it came late, but when it landed, it stayed. If this story struck a chord, like, share and drop your thoughts below. Comment 1 if you felt seen, or 2 if you think the ending still owes more.